Good morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is judgment and how it actually limits us in so many ways and keeps us separate. And we use it as a tool of self-preservation. So as we can start looking at that, maybe we can look at ways in which we default to self-protections. And anyway, we'll have a look at the dynamics of judgment, and it should be a fun conversation. But before we get started, let's take a couple minutes to get present. So let's take a deep breath through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells and all your organs, and bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale, exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And this time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale, exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel all those sensations, the friction, the motion, the temperature, the pressure, and the tickling and tingling when you stop, and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome, and welcome to everybody else who's joining us this morning. We're talking about judgment. So we talk about good judgment, we talk about bad judgment. We know that it's through our judgments, or we tend to believe that it's through our judgments that we are able to navigate the world. And I just want to make a distinction for us to be exploring together the distinction between judgment and discernment, because I think they often get confused. And what's inherent to judgment is a righteousness. It's a sense of being right or knowing better than somebody else. And it's also, I think a subtext to judgment is a whole bunch of shoulds, like people should believe what I believe, people should behave the way that I believe they should behave. And there's a righteousness inherent to it, right? Versus discernment. So being aware of the indicators that are present in our environment, indicators of, for instance, from a person's behavior. You might have indicators that they don't hold the same values that you hold, for instance, and therefore, without the judgment, the assumption, the making yourself right and making them wrong, or making ourselves right and making the other person wrong, we can recognize that there's a discrepancy of ideals, beliefs, whatever, and then use our discernment to act accordingly, to act appropriately in response to the truth or the reality of what the circumstance is presenting. This is different than passing judgment on someone. And it was interesting, this arose from a conversation that I referenced yesterday, actually, where it was an expansive conversation and very interesting to be looking at how there is in any judgment, whether we say good judgment or not, we are making assumptions of right and wrong. And I think that I'm going to make a linguistic distinction here, and in hopes that it can start to reach toward the essence of the difference, that when we have alignment within ourselves, we have a greater capacity for discerning what's present. When we're present, we're much better able to discern what the influences are in a given moment and to respond to those influences accordingly in an appropriate manner, or in a way, if we are aligned in a way that is congruent and within our integrity. So versus the separation, the whole conversation was a conversation around oneness and separation. And when we judge, we are othering, whether we do it to ourselves, because we often judge ourselves. You know, we're separating ourselves from ourselves by judging ourselves. And when we judge others. And I think that it's a nuance, but an important one. The outcome may appear the same, but the essence of it is different. So for instance, there's a certain behavior that I witness in somebody else that indicates to me that we don't have parity about our beliefs. So it's discerning for me to recognize that I can't make certain assumptions that this person is going to interact with me in the way that I might be interacting with them. That's different in its essence from judging someone and dismissing someone and othering that someone. It's still, from either vantage point, it may be that we end up not having interaction with that person, but the energy, we were talking about energy yesterday, the energy behind that decision is very different. There's a respect that is at the foundation, self-respect and respect for the fact that we don't all necessarily agree on things, and that we have the right to have different ideas and different perspectives, even if it seems that someone else's perspective is just deeply offensive. And we often get into arguments about what's right, and arguments about principles and morality, and I do that too. And I'm not I was going to say, I'm not making that wrong. It's just something that we do. And there's a potential for something that is beyond those polarities. There's a potential for us to reach another state that can reconcile the differences, that is somehow inclusive. And I know that in the past I've fought for the importance of judgment. And it's actually relatively recent that I have come to this nuance of discernment versus judgment. And we have to make decisions based on our own alignment, right? Which we typically call judgments. It's a judgment call, right? But I think that we get to start looking at this notion of discernment and what distinguishes that. So good morning, good evening, Gia. Welcome. It's so good to have you here with us. We're talking about judgment and how we level judgment on ourselves and others, and that there's a profound righteousness around that. You know, like we believe we know what's right. We believe we know what's better. We believe we know what's best. And somebody who doesn't agree with us is less than and separate. And it takes a very different presence to be able to move beyond these polarities that we are so deeply entrenched in our lives. Good morning, Robin. So good to have you here with us this morning. We are talking about judgment and the distinction between judgment and discernment. So the way that I'm sensing into it, now I'm going to say sensing into it because I don't know that I have access to perfect language for it, but that we may choose not to interact with someone given that there's a discordance, or maybe an irreconcilable discordance, or an unpleasant discordance in beliefs, behaviors. We can even say energy, frequency, that there's a discordance, and we may choose to not engage with that person and be respectful of that person's right to be how they are, because it's in the and I'm also thinking, like, if we're talking about crime, for instance, where a person hurts another person, we get to restrain them from doing so, right? And yet this notion of discernment allows us to still extend the respect for that person being their own individual, that also has the right to be who they are, even if we find it, and if we find it reprehensible. Obviously that's judgment, right? So it was interesting because it was a spiritually founded conversation looking at how do we get to a place that is beyond the polarity. And it really goes against everything we're indoctrinated to. It's very difficult to even have a conversation about it because I hold judgments. You know, I'm certainly not immune to that. You know, like I think that certain behaviors are reprehensible. And I guess the question is, you know, yes, maybe I'm judging a behavior and not the person. Is that possible? I had previously believed that we needed judgment to be able to allow ourselves to navigate through the world. And I am making the distinction of discernment. And discernment requires a greater level of presence. And in my intentions for myself, for the world I'm creating or I'm intending, we find some passages of or pathway to reconciliation, that we find a path of healing that heals the deep, deep, deep separation. And looking at judgment, there is no judgment that I'm aware of that doesn't have its own righteousness to it. And one of the people that I was speaking to came up with a really, really interesting perspective on this, that the judgment helped to validate their identity. So here are my principles, and I'm right, and I know better. And that's who I am. That's part of who I am. And it allows me to stay in those judgments. And so one of these people was talking about this deep disappointment that they had with the morality or the lack of morality that other people were exhibiting, particularly around money, but in all kinds of areas. And so what they recognized is that that the assumption was that everybody should have the same values. And just because their values were interpreting somebody else's response or actions as disappointing, it wasn't acknowledging that someone else was living according to their own moral code, for example. And in terms of this judgment thing, and it was also connected to suffering, because there's a whole lot of suffering around the judgment underlying, for instance, the moral decay of our contemporary world. For instance, if that's the perspective, that there's this deep moral decay, then there's a disappointment around that, and that disappointment is painful. Like we might have a sorrow over this state of the world, and that is based on an assumption that it should be different from the way it is. And so I'm wondering, like in being present, there's the notion of allowing the world to be as it is. And one of the hypotheses that I operate from is it's perfect. And I may not understand that perfection. I may not see that perfection. But what if things are unfolding exactly as they're meant to be unfolding, in this growing polarity and this growing friction due to the polarity? Maybe it's exactly what is necessary to create the change that needs to come about. Maybe it's just incredible growing pains. Maybe there is a bigger picture that I don't have any concept of. For sure, there's a bigger picture that I don't have any concept of. But the assumption when I have my righteousness about my principles and my morality and what's right and wrong, as far as according to me, then I'm constraining my picture. I'm defending my superiority, my existence in its way of maybe believing in my own wisdom. I believe in my own wisdom for myself. And I think we all do the best we can, even though some of us, in my probably not so humble opinion, do not such a great job. I do believe we do the best we can. And obviously our beliefs shape our perspective on all of this, and our beliefs shape our judgments. And what I look for more and more as the years go by, as my awareness has had more experience in the world, what I'm gleaning from that is that there's something more, that there's a very different place to operate from than where we are predisposed or indoctrinated to operate from, where we are indoctrinated to separation and judgment and competition and scarcity, separation. Rosalind says, can this concept be applied to what we eat to further discuss the difference between judgment and discernment? So sure, what we eat, I eat chocolate. Let's say I eat chocolate and I have these ideas about chocolate, or I'm trying to minimize my calories or minimize my sugar, and I go and eat chocolate, and then maybe I have all kinds of judgments about myself, like maybe I'm weak because I couldn't adhere to the rigor of whatever beliefs I had or commitments I made to myself. I might have all kinds of judgments about the food itself and the value of it, like the value of Cheetos, for example. I might have all kinds of ideas about that. And then I might transfer my ideas onto myself for eating those things, or onto others for eating those things, or even looking at vegetarianism and veganism. You know, well, you wouldn't know, but I'm a vegetarian and leaning toward veganism, and I've gone through periods of more rigorous sorts of constraints in diets for all different kinds of eating protocols. And there's lots and lots and lots of judgment that is part of that. And the discernment part, what might be to say, to actually be in a place of choice. Judgments are often really quite automatic and programmed, and often unexamined. And then we operate with those judgments as if they are truths. And even science is evolving, so we can work with things as hypotheses. We can work with things, adopting them and saying, okay, so I ate chocolate. How does my body feel? You know, am I bad and wrong for eating chocolate, or can I eat chocolate in moderation and enjoy it? And the enjoyment from it is enriching and maybe outweighs the deficit of that food, for instance. That's the distinction between discernment. You know, is discerning, well, okay, let's look at, instead of taking it on that this is what somebody has told me, let me recognize what's going on in my own physiology, in my own experience, and I can base a choice upon that rather than a notion of what I should do, because shoulds are coming from good, bad, right, wrong. And better, worse, less or more. Again, even this notion of judgment comes in all different flavors and sizes, and it is the source of so much suffering. And I spent a week years ago assisting at an event with the Dalai Lama. And the one big takeaway for me was that all suffering is a result of misconceptualization, meaning it's the way that we think that is creating our suffering. Pain is different. We can have pain without suffering, but that suffering is self-manufactured. And I will leave you with that thought for today, and with much gratitude. It's always such a privilege to be with you. I am Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel. Gia says, me too. I've been diehard vegetarian. Actually, we're born to be brought up in that way, and we don't even touch egg, forget eating it. But one thing is that we have had judgments on non-vegetarians. As I'm growing spiritual, I'm learning to release judgments on non-vegetarians. And I've had my judgments too, Gia. I think when we choose a path, we want to be able to justify our path. And that's where the judgments come in. And it allows us to validate ourselves and to feel right and righteous and to power the choices that we make. So we get to look at that the suffering is optional. And with that, so much love to you, so much appreciation. And I hope to see you here really soon. And until then, lots and lots of